Oh,
and that's dinner.
This is like.
that's a solid plan, man.
I mean, I just like
Those
make up
places
stuff
are-
and do it.
Stop it.
But he
Yeah.
mentioned.
Their camera, oh, there, is that it?
Since he was, I only need like 3 months.
She's not.
Yeah, it's nice.
That is. So. You should turn it.
What? It's so good, it's starting to go away.
Or it's just gonna, but obviously it'll be smaller.
So it will be
Like
dressed.
here's some more.
I'm getting too old for that. I'm an active draft.
I'm too old for it now, I think.
Unless it is
26 is
not-
cut off.
Not really
I don't know. I think like if
Oh, yeah,
it's a
yeah.
serious issue, they'll call older people like right at.
Well, we could be like off.
Starts mid-20s, then they go to early 20s, then back to older 20s.
So like.
I think we go real quick.
What's
So
it?
then.
Oh,
not the
yeah.
check. So then, well.
You can't draft me, look, I am 34.
If people ask questions, I just let the chat or something, right?
Yeah, so we can.
Okay. Yeah, alright.
Oh, man, I don't know.
You guys wake up on something.
It's my
Yeah,
mom's
that
like,
was rough.
Yeah.
I recovered.
But not as good as it used to
I
be.
can.
The second wind, I took Stella for an
I
long
probably
run.
won't be.
Later
I
in the
can
day.
answer every question.
This is true. I think I still
I was
just-
out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it looked like you're on the
How many students
I
are?
was like, man, I feel.
I had to back to Scallop, so I woke up, Tyler woke up early and walked to Arby's. He's in the hotel.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I woke up at 10, like, my dog needs me. I was in the cover.
I always feel guilty these hours, like, I always wake back to that.
Oh, right.
Yeah, it was rough, but I recovered. I gave up, I quit drinking that day, but I decided that was kind of a rash decision.
Yeah, I went to.
Yeah.
The fundraiser thing.
Listening
Oh,
to
I
the
didn't
little,
Yeah, you didn't make it.
Yeah, I was going
Carolina
to, but.
Canopy's workshop, and it was
Kevin Chase.
Yeah, I don't think I'm
Me.
losing my day.
Kevin Chase again.
And I forgot about it, too. I really wanted to support that, but I wasn't.
I was just gonna vent on him, so you could.
I thought maybe we didn't get the chance to chat, so I
But he can put the post in.
like ride with us over the call or whatever.
I was herping yesterday. Fish finding?
Yeah, red salamander.
I've seen her
Rusty.
speak, like,
That's-
periodically
like
over
that.
the past several years.
Should
He's
be
like,
right.
phenomenal.
That's more my wheelhouse.
My dog was fully torqued, so
I think
yeah, I
yesterday
like
was
hide it back under a rock.
Yesterday was like perfect. It was like 70 degrees out.
Yeah.
You texted me.
I'm
Yeah, that's
It was a
what
lot
Alex
early, but
said
I
we
know,
could.
like, the rest of my alarm. I'm always like, that's when the time alarm, so I woke up by 3:30.
But yeah, I'm really freaking huge. Literally, I'm always there.
It definitely rained
Today, I think.
I think it's supposed to rain only now.
Well, I'll probably.
I think tomorrow's
You're not
gonna be
worried about.
It's raining.
I think so. I think Saturday.
How far away is it?
Sunday.
Oh, Sunday.
Like, you know, a lot, and it's like, I really explain, like, I like to understand what's happening.
No, I'm not denying.
But today, it's supposed to rain till.
That's
Oh, really?
I felt so bad for him.
Next week.
I was like, oh my God. You did really well. You did really well. But I was just like, we just were talking about it and talking about it for like almost 2 hours. I was like, oh my God.
Really nice. Yeah.
I was just talking about it.
I was
It
wondering.
was good. You may have me on that train
Like 6 different projects. There's enough variation.
Oh,
After lunch, can I go see your lab?
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
you're not gonna see.
think I realized.
Wow.
There's.
No,
I'm
I'm
always.
dating.
Oh,
Oh, that's right. I'm just like, where do you stop? For her class.
So like before when it came up, it was like.
What's up?
I thought you were in trouble or something. It's just like a survey.
What's your library? I was like.
Like, man, like everybody.
No, my.
No, I think.
I didn't think of that. Oh, yeah, oh, that's.
In the more trying on and then for each side, I have 3 different. I have to protection
All right, everybody.
Welcome to today's environmental seminar. My name is Dave Coyle. I'm a assistant professor here, but you are not here to see me. You are here to hear Dr. Kelly Oten from North Carolina State University. Kelly is from College Station, so she's a native Texan. Went to A&M, master's at Tennessee, which we don't hold against her, but after that, she went to NC State and did her PhD. She worked for the North Carolina Forest Service for eight years.
Impressive, rattling on here.
Forest health specialist there, and just a couple of years ago, she joined the faculty at NC State as an assistant professor of forest health and invasive species up there. So Kelly and I work together a lot. We've known each other for a long time, so I'm very happy to have her here. And with that, Kelly, the floor is yours.
I'm happy to be here. Thank y'all for having me. I was one of those lucky people who was interviewed and then hired during the pandemic. So it took me like 4 months to actually meet the department head. It's still really weird and still feels like I'm getting settled in my new position. But today I'm here to talk about invasive species, but particularly one that we've been battling for some time in North Carolina, and which y'all, the state of South Carolina, just entered the battlefield to fight, and that is the emerald ash borer. But before we get into the emerald ash borer and what we'll find there, does anyone recognize what movie this is from? This is a throwback. Usually I have older people in the crowd who recognize it immediately. Anyone know?
I don't know what it's called, but
You recognize it? It's from the movie Them. So in the 1950s, several movies came out about like big bugs taking over towns. And basically the invasion of insects was a real fear back then. It was basically fueled by all the nuclear explosion back then. All of a sudden nuclear plants were popping up everywhere. But now it is something that we're actually battling, although not nearly this size, obviously. Dave mentioned we work in the field of forest health, and there are lots of things that impact forest health. You're not going to read all this. I'm not going to talk about all this, but this is just a diagram showing all the different things that can impact the health of a tree. A lot. So anytime we go and visit a tree that's declining in some way, there's a lot of possibilities on the table. So it's a little bit like CSI trying to figure out what we're looking at. But a lot of us, Dave, Jess Hartshorn in the back there, we deal with insects a lot. And that's because insects kill more trees every year than any other menace. And that includes forest fires. Twice the number of trees are killed each year by insects than forest fires. And this is our friend, the southern pine beetle, decimating some trees right there. And you can see this is a huge southern pine beetle spot right here. So native insects do cause some tree damage, but not nearly what we see when it comes to invasive species. Invasive species are really the tree killers out there, and in some cases responsible for complete genus eradication, extinction in the United States. So we're going to focus on the invasive problem here in the United States rather than some of the natives. How many invasives are there? The newest data says approximately 6,500 species in the United States are invasive. But this is out of the more than 50,000 non-native species. So if you think about it, a lot of our agricultural systems are non-native species. So just because something is not native does not mean it's invasive. However, those are the ones that we're concerned about. And one of the reasons that we continue to get non-natives introduced into the US is because we're bringing imports over here all the time. This is a graph showing from the 1900s, or right here, you can see around 1950, imports just skyrocket. So we're always bringing more and more international trade into the US. This is a map showing all of our more common trade routes. So you can see every day the number of imports coming in, and within those imports could be hidden surprises. So 95% of our introductions are accidental. There is a 5%. Some people do intentionally introduce things. When you think about it, a lot of plants are introduced for ornamental purposes, soil stability, things like that. But then there's also cases where insects are introduced. Lymantria dispar, formerly known as gypsy moth, maybe soon to be known as spongy moth. That was an intentional introduction, believe it or not. But the vast majority are accidental introductions because of how we do trade. Now, a lot of them in the field of forestry, we're concerned with wood packing material. That's because the insects that would be inside wood are those that attack trees, right? Makes sense. There are regulations that require treatment. So if you look at a wood pallet, And if it came from outside the country, then you should see a stamp on it right there. That's part of the ISPM 15, basically this international agreement that if you're sending wood packing material elsewhere in the world, you've got to treat it. So this code right here, the US treated it. There's the individual code for the facility that treated it. And then the HT means heat treatment. So that's how they treated the pallet before it was shipped. So introducing this ISPM 15 regulation actually reduced accidental introductions by 30 to 50%. So that's significant, but things obviously still slip through the cracks. Another problem are live plants. So things come in on living material a lot. That's how the hemlock lily delta got here. An invasive insect killing all of the hemlocks from Georgia to Maine essentially came in on infested hemlock stock. We do have inspections at the port, usually as customs and border protection at the different ports, whether it be airports, seaports. They have agricultural agents that do go around, not just inspecting the material itself, but also the cargo, the containers and everything like that. But people can only be so many places out at a time, right? If you were to guess what percentage of imports was actually inspected, what would you guess it would be?
Yeah, it's somewhere between 1% and 5%.
Yeah, less than 2% is actually inspected. So it's surprising, right? Like you can't see everything. There's other things in place, but obviously that's why we're going to continue to have problems. Does anyone know what this is? This is a photo from 1910. Has anyone been to DC during the cherry blossoms blooming? No, you should. It's beautiful. The first shipment of cherry blossoms that Japan sent over to the US, it was supposed to be the sign of peace. They were going to plant them all around the tidal basin. They actually found insects and nematodes in the soil. And so the US burned them on the National Mall. Japan had a good humor about it, I guess. A couple years later, they sent more trees. And so now you can see the cherry blossoms in April blooming every time. But this was basically the first interception where the USDA was actually like, whoa, like this would be bad news if these insects got out and started impacting our local forests, our local agricultural commodities, and all those things. At the time, this was a direct order from the president to burn those trees. But thankfully, Japan had a good sense of humor about it. And it's a problem that we're going to continue to have, but it's also a problem that we've seen before. Does anyone know what trees these are? American chestnut, that's right, beautiful trees called the redwoods of the East, right? It would have been awesome to see those. In the early 1900s, chestnut blight was introduced, and that's why we basically have ecological functional extinction of this tree in our forests. We have another incident, Dutch elm disease. Elm trees were once a very popular planting along streets. Nightmare on Elm Street, named for that, right? But Dutch elm disease was introduced, a disease that spread by 2 different beetles, and it basically wiped out all of our elm trees. So what do you think happened? When all of the elm trees disappeared, what did they replant with? Ash. That's right, it's happening all over again. So diversify your plantings, people. So in North Carolina, our species du jour, the one that we've been dealing with for about the past decade, past 9 years anyway, is emerald ash borer. And that's what I'm going to focus on today, how we found it and then what we're trying to do to combat it in North Carolina. It was first introduced in the US in Detroit. It was first found in 2002. But looking at the infestations and determined it had been there for at least 8 to 10 years already by the time they realized it was there. Likely, no surprise, arrived in wood packing material to the Detroit port. Now, emerald ash borer is a beetle. It has wings, it can fly, but they're not the best flyers. Literature says they can fly up to 5 miles a year, but frankly, that's kind of hard for me to buy, just seeing how they fly. They don't seem super adept. The bigger risk is the human movement. How they got here in the first place is also how they're continuing to get around once they got here, continue to be introduced to new areas. So this picture right here, you see it's firewood, but the bark is stripped off, and all of those galleries are emerald ash borer galleries. So obviously not a great thing to move this around to new areas. But it's not just firewood, ash logs, if ash is harvested, tree waste. If street trees are pruned, where are those being brought? And I used to think this nursery stock was kind of a joke. I was like, well, these trees are tiny, but now I've seen emerald ash borer attacking trees that are 1/2 inch in diameter. So they will go after small branches and small trees. It's quite amazing, frankly, from an entomological standpoint for a boring insect. Now, when it comes to invasive species, this is the invasive curve. So we have introduction, and before an introduction occurs, you try to do everything you can to prevent it from coming in, right? So we have our ESPN 15, we have our people inspecting things as they come in, and we're always looking for new things that are here. Once it's detected, eradication might still be on the table. One of the insects that Dave and I work on, Asian longhorned beetle, if you find an infested area before it spreads too quickly, eradication of that localized area is still possible, and it's been successful many times. But once the population grows, the chances of eradicating it quickly disappear. And then you're looking at management and other forms of basically learning to live with this invasive species. So because of this, we want this detection zone to happen as quickly as we can, right? So a lot of time and energy goes into actually detecting these invasive species. We set traps. This is actually an EDRR trap, which stands for Early Detection Rapid Results. Very like our acronyms. These are placed around ports. And there's 3 different traps or 3 different lures, and basically we're looking for anything that is not native or we didn't know it to be in the US before. And we're placing it by ports, obviously, because that's the pathway that non-natives will be introduced. So we'll trap near ports. We also do aerial survey at least once a year, if not twice a year. This is I used to work with the North Carolina Forest Service. This is a flight we're doing. We basically, try to focus on different areas, looking for new infestations. We'll also have some interesting surveys. This is an embarrassing photo where I got a 4-wheeler stuck, but sometimes surveys can be fun. So that's why I include it. We had an incident where a pilot infestation of emerald ash borer popped up, and it was right near a campground. And so we were surveying the campgrounds, which happened to be a 4-wheeler park. So it just happened to be the best way to survey. But a lot of time, effort, and money goes into detecting these invasive species very early on. And that's exactly what we were doing when we first found emerald ash borer in North Carolina. We were checking a trap. This is what the trap looks like. You kind of get this panel, I'm folding it here. The outside of it is sticky. You hang a lure in the middle and then you hang it up in a tree. And this is not me, but it makes me laugh. Someone dressed up like an emerald ash borer, trap with their little baby as the emerald ash borer for Halloween. I wish I'd been that creative. But we were actually checking a trap when we first found emerald ash borer in North Carolina. But guess what? The trap was negative. There was no emerald ash borer on the trap. We're hoisting the trap back up. This one was attached or hanging with a rope. And then we look at the tree and there's this D-shaped exit hole. Telltale sign of emerald ash borer. Pretty sure an expletive came out of my mouth at that moment. My colleagues and I continued to look. We started prying up the bark of the ash tree, and then we saw the galleries underneath the bark. And then that's when we knew my first day back after vacation to Mexico would not be leisurely. It was quite chaotic. So there I am. You can tell it's an old FedEx. I have bangs. That's supposed to be a frowny face. This is the first tree we found emerald ash borer on in North Carolina. And this was actually the very first beetle we found. The wings are a little clipped, it's hard to tell there, but we actually nicked the beetle as it was emerging out of the tree while we were surveying. So what did we do? Well, freaked out a little bit. I mean, we knew emerald ash borer was coming. It was one of those things that like everyone was warning us about at the forest health meetings for years. It had been found in Virginia, so we were expecting it. But it was a kind of a collective like, okay, we gotta, this is hitting the ground running. We immediately started doing delimiting and ongoing surveys to try to figure out, well, how bad is this? How extensive is the infestation? And when I say we immediately did it, like there was a hurricane the next day. And our boss was still, we're doing this. I was like, okay, let's go stand under dying trees during a hurricane. Great idea. And then we also established a quarantine so that people would not be able to move firewood or ash material around. So after those initial surveys, we actually found it within a matter of 2 weeks in 4 different counties in North Carolina along the state line. You can see right there, again, not a surprise because of where it had been found in Virginia. But also this is a really cool map. These are like almost all shaded in at this point. But back in 2013, you can see how these satellite populations really just popped up all over the place. The same week we found it in North Carolina, they found it in central Georgia. So very fascinating. So we continue to do surveys, we respond to reports. We did trapping for a while, but that's kind of died down because it's everywhere now. Windshield surveys, which means you can drive around looking out your window, looking for dead trees. Riparian surveys, that's kayaking, a fancy word for it, because where does green ash grow? Along rivers and creeks and streams, lots of fun kayak surveys there. And then there's this other cool program that NCDA did, the Cerceris biosurveillance program. Cerceris is a genus of wasps. There it is right here. And they forage and gather different requested species and provision their nests with it. Well, we figured out, not we, they figured out that Cerceris will collect emerald ash borer if they're in the area. So they basically monitor, it's a ground dwelling wasp. They put this little card over the entrance to their nest. And basically that hole is large enough for the wasp to get through, but not large enough for the wasp plus emerald ash borer, they're mating there. Not enough for both the prey and the wasp to get through. So then the wasp will basically drop it outside of the entrance to the nest there, and then be like, oh crap, there's emerald ash borer somewhere within this, 2-mile area that this wasp has foraged. So we've had 4 new counties detected positive for emerald ash borer using this method. So kind of cool story there. All right, what we look for when we're doing surveys, a thin canopy, the obvious thing. You'll see epidemic sprouting sometimes, not all the time. This is pretty extensive, but it is something that you'll see. Increased woodpecker activity. This is called blonding because they kind of, peck the bark off and it kind of lightens the color of the tree. And it's one of the good ways to survey for emerald ash borer in the winter when the leaves are off. And then vertical splits in the bark. You can actually see the galleries right there. And that's exactly where we would pry in our little tool and pull up the bark and look for the galleries in there. But direct evidence of the insect, obviously the galleries that the larvae are feeding on right under the bark. The bad thing about this is you do have to pry up the bark, and if the tree's not infested, whoopsies. But the external sign is a D-shaped exit hole. So when I say D-shaped exit hole, a lot of people are like, is it really that distinct? Oh yeah, when we first saw it in North Carolina, we were like, this is as distinct as they said it was. You got the straight edge and then a curved edge. And it can be any which way. On these pictures, it looks like the straight edge is up, but they can be turned in any direction. So very, very clear sign that you have it. Now the problem with the D-shaped exit hole is this happens as the adult leaves the tree. But emerald ash borer infests the tree in the upper branches first, and then works its way down. So if you see a D-shaped exit hole at eye level, that tree is too far gone. There's nothing you can do for it at that point. So that is one negative thing about it. All right, so here's our current range of emerald ash borer in North Carolina. You can see it kind of looks scattered, but really it's not. It's one of those things where once we find it in the county, reports are kind of go out the window. They're like, it's all over in the county. We now have it in 62 counties in North Carolina in just 9 years, which is amazing for an invasive forest pest. I could not think of another faster spreading invasive forest pest, but I didn't want to leave y'all out. Here's your infested area in South Carolina. Congratulations. All right, so what's the big deal? What's the big deal with ash? In North Carolina, ash make up 2% of our forests. That doesn't sound like a lot. It's probably not that much, but that is 258 million trees. And that's FIA data. So it doesn't account for your street trees, your urban trees, which we know there's a lot of plantings of those. Because it's an urban tree, you have property value loss if you lose your trees. Having a canopied street is a huge increase in the property value. But as they die, if it's not treated, then you have trees falling apart, landing on cars, maybe people, maybe your house. So there's a problem there. And then you're going to have to do something about it, whether you remove and replace the tree or decide to treat it, there's a cost there. So there's a lot of money in the fact that it is a popular urban tree. We're also losing an industry. High value timber species, Louisville slugger, baseball bats is a popular wood product made with ash. Now they are starting to switch to maple more and more, but ash is kind of the traditional wood, and some people still use it. And ash is one of those species that we use a lot in conservation plans. It's one of those trees that foresters say you can just stick in the ground and walk away and it's just fine. So we lost that as well. And then just the many ecological functions that ash plays in the riparian ecosystems that can be found. So we're seeing a lot of mortality, over 99% mortality of ash if it's untreated. This is over the Stanton River, just north of the North Carolina and Virginia state line. All of those gray trees there are dead ash trees. Here's another image. This is in Wisconsin, where ash makes up a larger component of their forest ecosystems. So you can see that entire stand, just dead ash trees. But again, it's an urban tree. We're seeing it on streets. So now you're losing entire streets that are lined with ash, complete mortality. This is a photo series taken by Dan Herms out of Ohio. And obviously that's devastating for those homeowners. But it's not just ash we're worried about. Emerald ash borer will also attack white fringe tree. Not the Chinese version of white fringe tree, but Chinaephus virginicus can get infested. It seems that it doesn't always kill the tree, but a lot of people have these ornamentally, and it will cause dieback, less flowering, makes it look not so great. All right, so where did it come from? It is native to Asia. And in Asia, it is not a problem there. There's a lot of reasons that they attribute to that. One is resistance in Asian ash, primarily Manchurian ash, which is considered completely resistant to emerald ash borer. They do attribute it to the patchiness of the forest there, but I don't know if I buy that simply because we have patchy ash forests in North Carolina and it's doing just fine moving around. So I don't know how much that plays in. But then another big thing is a natural enemy complex. So in its native range, there's lots of insects, lots of predators that are playing a role in reducing the population of emerald ash borer. And we're going to talk about that and how we're going to use that to our advantage here in the US. All right, so what are our management options for emerald ash borer? Well, there are a few. I'm going to go through one by one, and we're going to talk about options available and ongoing research for more long-term management. Good news, it's an invasive in which pesticides actually work. In some cases, we are like doom and gloom, these are invasive species, but like there's nothing you can do. Laurel wilt disease is a good example. We're like, well, all of your red bear and sassafras are going to die. There's nothing that can be done. There's not a quarantine, there's not a pesticide. That's not the case with emerald ash borer. You can treat ash trees with pesticides and it works. This is a photo on the left right here. This tree was treated with insecticides and this one on the right was not. So obviously not doing so hot. There are two major insecticides that are used. One is emamectin benzoate, and this gets the gold star. This pesticide is the best thing to use against emerald ash borer. You can see right here, it's usually stem injected. And basically it's a systemic insecticide. The tree takes it up into its xylem, goes around the canopy, that comes back down in the phloem, and is distributed throughout the tree. And is very, very effective against emerald ash borer for at least 2, in many cases, 3 years. The bad part about this one is, if you hire a company to do it, it's about $10 to $15 per inch DBH. That's pretty expensive. Like a large tree in someone's yard is going to cost a couple $100 to treat, and then you tell them, well, you're going to have to do this every 2 to 3 years. And you know, there's a decision that has to be done there. There are some formulations of it where anyone can buy it themselves. It's not restricted use, but you still have to know how to do a stem injection. You still have to have specialized equipment. So because of that, it can be prohibitive to your average homeowner or landowner. This is the other option, imidacloprid or dinotefuran, typically a soil drench, you see right there. This is way more cost effective. This is the cheaper option, but you get what you pay for. In the case of pesticides with emerald ash borer, if you just go to your big box store and buy like Bio-Advanced Tree and Shrub, the jug of imidacloprid off the shelf, you'll probably pay about $2 per inch DBH. That's not bad. And if you use a different formulation like a water-soluble packet, then you can lower that even lower. Like we've seen it, if you're buying in bulk, you can get it to around 20 cents per inch DBH. So that's pretty impressive. The bad thing with imidacloprid and dinotefuran is that you have to reapply every year. Because of the formulation, because of the molecule of the pesticide is not retained nearly the same way that emamectin benzoate is, and it is also not as effective. So often what some people will do is treat with emamectin benzoate until they get the population down, kill all the beetles in the tree, and then treat with this just to keep them at bay. So that is one option. Now, another negative thing about imidacloprid and dinotephron is they are neonicotinoid pesticides. Why is that such a bad thing? Does anyone know?
How much do you like your bees?
Exactly. So there's a big concern with neonicotinoids impacting pollinators. Now, ash is not pollinated by insects. It's a very safe use of the chemical, and it's saving thousands of trees. We have a hemlock program in North Carolina where we've treated nearly 100,000 hemlock trees with imidacloprid and dinotephron. But hemlock's not visited by pollinators either. So it can be a very effective way of treating trees, keeping them safe. But it may not be available for long. In North Carolina, there's bills that have been filed to try to make neonicotinoids a restricted use or maybe ban them altogether. Some states have already done it. Maine recently banned the use of neonicotinoids that goes into effect next year. So we are probably, most people in the industry are not saying if, but when we use neonicotinoids. Now, some people also think that we may have an exception for battling invasive species, but to be determined. Still a very valuable tool, as you know, in the field of forestry. So it'll be very sad to lose that, and sad to give homeowners like a cheaper option. Like, yeah, you can go to Lowe's right now. You could treat your tree this afternoon. If these become restricted use, we'll lose the ability to say that. So a little bit of a bummer there. Now, there are tons of insecticides that are labeled other than those other two that I just listed, but there's a publication out there, which is why I'm not going into them. The ones I listed are the only two that I have seen, either the neonicotinoid or the emamectin benzoate, and by far the emamectin benzoate is the way to go. In fact, when I was with the Forest Service, we established this ash protection program where we helped municipalities treat all of their urban trees. And one of the requirements was, you can tell what you right here, is that it be treated with emamectin benzoate, so that it protected the trees for 2 to 3 years. So how long do you think you're gonna have to treat trees? You know, a lot of people think, well, emerald ash borer have come through, kill all the trees in the forest, then can I stop treating my ash tree? What do y'all think? Yeah? Remember what I said about emerald ash borer infesting trees that are like 1/2 inch diameter? As seedlings come up, emerald ash borer is going to hang around. There's going to be lower populations of them, but they're going to be around for the long term. So if you've seen the Sandlot, you're probably going to have to treat them into perpetuity. So that's something you have to take into account. If you decide to start treating an ash tree, you're in for the long haul. Every 2 to 3 years if you use emamectin benzoate. All right, but there are other options on the table, right? You can just cut them down. You don't have to worry about it. And a lot of municipalities are doing it. That satellite population of emerald ash borer I mentioned, where it was near a campground, we first found it in these pure stands of ash. And it was over 100 miles from the nearest known infestation. And we were like, yes, we caught it early. We're amazing. Let's get rid of this little satellite population of emerald ash borer. So we went in there and we cut down 7 acres of pure ash and burned them. It took about 3 days to do, and it was just fascinating to see the operation. None of those stumps were sprayed, by the way, with herbicides. So what do you think that looks like now? Oh, all these multi-stemmed ash are in there. It's quite fascinating. And then, of course, emerald ash borer is having a heyday in there. Research-wise, it's amazing. I'm like, maybe we should just keep doing this and have a population of EAB to work with forever. But it's not just situations like this where we would do flow arm reduction of to treat emerald ash borer. Municipalities, towns do it a lot. The city of Raleigh, where NC State is, that's how they're treating emerald ash borer infested trees, basically as hazard trees. As they become infested, they're going to take them down. This is in Rochester, New York, again, a straight line with ash trees. In this scenario, the story is that they didn't even tell homeowners. So they left for work one day and came home with this. It looks like a completely different neighborhood. You see the lamppost right there. It's the same lamppost. It's right there. But I would be furious. And look, they didn't even replant. Those jerks. All right. But hopefully when they replant, diversify. Again, lesson learned. All right, another thing that we're looking into, switching from kind of the immediate response, you can use pesticides or just get rid of your problem if you are okay losing your ash, But we're also interested in long-term solutions, especially for forested areas, and that's where biological control comes in. Now, biological control, there are a lot of native species native to the US that are taking advantage of emerald ash borer being around. Beetles, there's a checker beetle right there, just, you know, decapitating an emerald ash borer. Woodpeckers, in areas where emerald ash borer has infested, the populations of woodpeckers have skyrocketed. They love to eat, like that blonding I was saying on the side of the trees, that's all woodpecker activity. There's also a lot of parasitoids. I think we're up to 18 or 19 native species of parasitoids that have been found to attack emerald ash borer. These 4 families are the primary ones. But then we also have classical biological control at our disposal. Does anyone know what classical biological control is? It's probably what you think of when you think of biological control. It's where you go to the native range of the invasive, find what's impacting it there, and then bring those natural enemies to the new area and try to establish them, try to reduce their populations that way. So we are looking into it. Oh, there's the woodpecker picture again. We are looking into that here in the United States. Now, this is a program run by USDA APHIS. They first started searching for the parasitoids or natural enemies the year after they found emerald ash borer in the United States. A group of the USDA researchers met up with a lot of the Chinese researchers, and they searched the area, and they came up with now 4 species of parasitoid wasps that attack emerald ash borer, and 4 have been released. They're reared in Brighton, Michigan currently, and if you're part of the receiving end of that program, basically they just like ship you a container full of wasps, and it's a very awkward conversation with the FedEx guy when he's like, "What's in the box?" Wasps. But when you say wasps, a lot of people freak out. They're like, "Don't release wasps." But this is one of the species on my finger. They are tiny. If you saw one, you would probably think it was a gnat. This is Tetrasticus. There's a Spathius is a little bit larger. You'll see a picture of it here in a minute. But they're so tiny, they can't sting humans. I did when we first started releasing these, the local NPR station called me, and I was like trying to emphasize that they don't sting people, they only sting emerald ash borer. Then they watched the whole story, and they're like, "They don't have stingers at all." And I was like, this is just always something wrong. So in North Carolina, there are 4 species approved for release, but these are the 3 species we've released in North Carolina just because they're more suited to southern conditions. And actually, this one is starting to be questionable. So we may not be releasing that any much longer, which is kind of sad because that's the easiest one to read in lab. But this first one is an egg parasitoid. So the female wasp lays her egg on or in an emerald ash borer egg, and the larva of that wasp, when it hatches, basically eats the egg from the inside. So it never hatches. Very cool. And then about 60% of EAB are parasitized by this wasp in its native range. So this is what a parasitized egg looks like. You see a little hole right there where that wasp had emerged, and obviously no emerald ash borer came out of that egg. Now this is the one we're most hopeful about. This is Spathius agrilli. It is a larval parasitoid. In its native range, this wasp will parasitize up to 90% of emerald ash borer. Now it is an external parasitoid, which is kind of unusual. This is what it looks like. So you can kind of see the larva there, but all of these little worm-like things on the outside of the larva are the wasp larva, the Spathius attacking that larva. But basically them feeding on Spathius or them feeding on the emerald ash borer, it never emerges. So very cool. I really like parasitoids. And then the last one is Tetrasticus here. This is an internal larval parasitoid, a little hard to see, but inside there's tons of them inside the body of that emerald ash borer, and up to 50% parasitism in its native range. So we're rearing these, or rather USDA is, at their biocontrol facility. When they first went and started looking at some of these natural enemies, they found 12 species and brought them over, reared them in quarantine, and basically we're trying to make sure it won't attack any of our natives. That's a big question that people always ask, like, are these going to have a negative impact? And we've certainly seen that before, where a biological control agent has been released and it didn't exactly go as planned. So we're ultra cautious. These 4 species haven't seen any negative impacts of them yet, so hopefully it stays that way. And this is what a release of a parasitoid wasp looks like. This little cup is just full of wasps. There's probably about 200 in there, and we just go to the base of an infested ash tree and just like, there you go, guys. Go find something, go eat them. And right here, can you find the Spathius? It's right there in the middle. It's very hard to see, but that's the reason I'm including it. They're so tiny and very difficult to see, but it's out there trying to, you know, locate emerald ash borer under the bark. So very fun to actually get that shipment come in. So this is the primary area where releases have occurred in North Carolina. You probably don't know many of those areas, but basically showing almost 93,000 wasps have now been released in North Carolina. The biological control program has said for every wasp that they produced, it costs about $3. So you can do the math. Fingers crossed this works. These are nationwide releases of parasitoids. So you can see all over. It's happened since 2007 in the Midwest and Northeast, simply because emerald ash borer was there first, and they are seeing establishment. Not only are they seeing establishment, but they're seeing successful suppression of emerald ash borer population. So that's really promising, right? Like, awesome. Like, we're only behind them by 6 years. Is this going to be a similar paper that we publish in another 5 years? Fingers crossed. But we started looking for, in some of these areas where we did do parasitoid releases, we use these yellow pan traps, which some insects love to they're attracted to. This is Caleb Cochran. He was our forest health intern one summer. He went around and did all of our yellow pan traps to try to recover these wasps. Basically, are they sticking around a year or two after we released them? And they weren't. We couldn't find any. Maybe they were, but we just couldn't detect them. Who knows? But it was kind of disappointing, right? Like, you put all this effort into releasing them, and we're like, it's not working. But we weren't alone. This is something that was being seen across the South. We just weren't getting the establishment that they were getting in the Midwest and Northeast. And we started thinking, well, does this have to do with the emerald ash borer life cycle? In the Midwest and Northeast, emerald ash borer goes through either 1 or 2 years for one life cycle. So that means in the spring, when parasitoids emerge, then there's always larvae present. So we're like, do we have a different life cycle here? Could we perhaps, it's warmer down here, could we perhaps have 2 generations per year? About the time we started pondering this picture came in. Oh my gosh, I found this in Craven counties. We're like, oh no, this would be a new emerald ash borer county seen on December 14th, 2018. And we're like, oh my gosh, maybe we do have 2 generations of emerald ash borer here. But then we were looking, we're like, this picture looks a little funny. And we reverse Google image searched it and found this image from 2014. There you go, from athensnews.com. So there's a side-by-side picture. Why would someone do that? They basically submit another picture, like, I found this, and obviously people are strange, but beetle hate is what we call it. Anyway, so I currently have a master's student. He should be finishing up in June, trying to determine what the actual life cycle of emerald ash borer was in the South. So there's Ryan Bohannon. Basically, every 2 weeks he went and debarked 6 trees, counted every single larva, and determined what life stage it was in, so that he could come up with basically a chart showing what the life cycle of emerald ash borer was in North Carolina. And this is what he found. And from June through August is when it completely tapers off, or the first and second instar were stages of the larva of the insect. And then we see the 3rd and 4th instars really showing up about July through October. Now I'm pointing out this one because this is when, these are the life stages that the parasitoids are searching for. They're not interested in 1st and 2nd instar. So if you release parasitoids in June, they would have nothing to feed on. So this is really helping us time up our parasitoid releases much better. So this is the susceptible life stages for parasitoids to attack. There's Spathius aguirrei right there. And then we had pupae for throughout the winter, basically. And then, that was a pre-pupa. And then there's the pupa, and then adults in May and June. All right, so hopefully now that we know when to release the wasps, we can, do a better job and they will become established. But it also tells us that we can't release the species of wasps that need something that need third and fourth starts in March and April. And that's what Tetrasticus was, that small one on my finger, which is why we're no longer releasing them. But Spathius is still a good candidate. All right, another thing that we're looking for in terms of long-term control of emerald ash borer is host plant resistance. This is one that's, hasn't been getting a ton of attention, but the reason for that is you don't even realize it's something to pay attention to until emerald ash borer comes through and has eaten up all your trees. And then you're like, that one's still alive, what's going on here? So the term that's been given to these surviving ash trees after a wave of emerald ash borer has come through is lingering ash. And they found is about 0.01% of ash. That's a very low, right? But it's still there. And what do they say? What's the best way to find a needle in a haystack? You burn down the haystack. And that's exactly what emerald ash borer is doing. It's killing all of the susceptible trees. And then if we have surviving trees like we do here, this is a stand just outside of Raleigh. All of the trees around it are dead practically. This stand has 95% mortality, but look at the canopy of that ash tree. Is it a survivor or is it just escape? Like, will it die also? To be determined, right? This is that same stand. You can see it's just completely dead. It's actually kind of scary to walk around in that stand at this point. There's 32,000 ash trees in these stands over, gosh, I can't remember how many acres, 32,000, and 160 of them still look good. So we've marked all of them. We're monitoring them over time. We're trying to find better ways to establish them. This is my PhD student working on it. He's trying to get some cuttings right there to try to find an easy and quick way to do rooted cuttings of ash trees. And then the last thing we want to do, obviously, since we're playing a huge role in this invasive beetle moving around, is try to reduce the spread. We don't want this to get around. We want solutions to become available and there's still be ash trees left to save, right? So when it comes to reducing the spread, yes, there was a federal quarantine associated with emerald ash borer, but that was lifted about a year ago. So that's no longer in play. Now it's completely resting on education and trying to encourage people not to move infested material around. Firewood right there, you see these people are going camping, big no, don't bring it with you. But some campgrounds actually ban it. So a lot of state parks discourage it, but a lot of national parks will not let you in without, unless the firewood has been treated. So just something to make you aware of if you are a big camper, make sure you check the regulations. Or just better yet, don't bring firewood anyways, because you could easily be moving this thing around. When I was with the Forest Service, one of the things we did for outreach was target baseball. And the reason for that is because of the link between ash wood and baseball bats. You can see right here, there's lots of baseball bats that are still being made out of ash, even though more than half of them are now maple. But maple is 3 times as likely to break than ashes. So there's still a lot of people who prefer ash. Joe DiMaggio right there. He used an ash bat in the longest hitting streak. And yes, I'm reading it because I'm not a sports person, but I did do a lot of sports research for this. So I felt very cool. But yeah, so we've done baseball outreach to try to, and also reach like a captive audience too. Like they're coming in, they want to have a good time. Be like, don't you want to hear about something terrible? Yeah, why not? We also do outreach at our local museum, has something called Bug Fest every year. And it sounds cute and adorable, but it is a massive event. We have about 35,000 people who show up. And so we have this, basically just line of people coming through. We play a game, you can see is Plinko, but we call it invasive insect Stinko. And the puck goes and they win prizes and all that stuff. But all of the prizes have like a don't move firewood message, and we try to basically share with them why. And a lot of people, if they haven't heard of it, they get it. They're like, oh, I never thought about that. So just trying to get the word out is something that we're really big. You see these banners back here as well. With that, I think I still have time for questions, but I want to leave you with a parting picture of my adorable daughter, who's now 7, but she has a don't move firewood, it makes me cry shirt on. So don't make her cry. There's my email if y'all have any questions. And with that, I will open the floor if y'all have any questions or thoughts.
Thanks, Kelly. Questions, folks?
I think there's someone in
Oh, raise hand. Oh.
Hi, can you hear me?
Do I unmute
Ask
it?
the question.
Angelica, do you want to put it in the chat?
Can you hear me?
I got this, carry on.
What advice would you have for those of us coming into the field to, I guess, impart the most change? Like, where do you see, what are the hurdles that you see with your experience that are going to be left over in the next decade or so?
In forest health in general? Oh, wow, that's a
Sorry.
big question. I don't know, like it's one of those things where like you want to be like shiny eyed and optimistic and say like reduce introductions, but I know that's unlikely, right? I think there's huge advancements to be made in the field of host plant resistance, especially including genetics and like genetically modifying trees. I know like some people cringe about that. They want the actual tree that's in the forest to be the same tree in the forest, but chestnut white is a really good example of how they backcrops the tree for 70 years, and they finally had a tree that was like 96, 97% chestnut, but it retained the resistant properties of the tree that they backcrossed it with. And then meanwhile, genetics was like, oh, we can bring that out in 2 years.
Yeah.
So that's just like a really exciting phase that I hope to see grow in the future, but also realize that, you know, a lot of people are interested in other realms. Yes. What's the next step with the deregulation of VAB? It is completely deregulated at this point, unfortunately, or unfortunately. It was a lot of disagreement about that when it came up. They opened it for public comment, and some people were like, "What's the harm in keeping it there?" But basically, APHIS just decided we're putting our resources elsewhere. So it is completely deregulated, which means ash material can move anywhere right now. That being said, there are other quarantines in place for other insects. So there's a Lymantria disbark quarantine. You have to inspect things when you leave that quarantine zone. Haywood County in North Carolina is quarantined for walnut twig beetle. So if you move firewood outside of Haywood County, it has to be treated or only moved during certain times of the year. But emerald ash borer is completely deregulated, so there are no next steps. We've come full circle on that one. Yeah.
So with the chemical treatment and the lingering trees,
Yeah.
is there any effect of the chemical treatment on the tree being able to develop any resistance? I'm just thinking about, we're treating hundreds of ash trees up on the Appalachian Trail, and I'm just wondering, is there any, does that decrease the resistance the tree can develop, or the population of the tree can develop?
I don't know if anyone's looked specifically at that, but indications are probably not.
Probably not.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's good.
Yes.
I was
Dr.
just gonna
Marchand.
say, because isn't Brian Alcama has a student who's actually looking at the opposite of that, that treatment with pesticides actually protects a bigger area of ash than just that one tree. So I don't know what their status is, but I think it might actually be like
The reverse.
the inverse of that, yeah.
So
That's at Minnesota, so there might be something online.
So meaning treating a large area of ash, you're more likely to save large area of ash.
Meaning that you can treat less and still get like a wider range of protection.
I see. Okay.
So like treating one ash tree might actually protect surrounding, you know, half a dozen ash trees.
Oh, cool.
Given that this is a problem that seems to be moving from northern states, our direction, what are things, I guess I don't really know what South Carolina is doing to, combat this issue, but what things, are there things being communicated that way? And like, what, do you know what strategies there are to try to prevent us climbing that curve that invasive?
Yeah, that'd be a good question of what's going on here. As far as the parasitoid releases, that's usually handled by government agencies. So I did those releases programmatically when I was with the North Carolina Forest Service. And the USDA will also do that as well. So the releases that I showed, there's a few more than in North Carolina. I do not know if they're releasing them in South Carolina. If they are, they haven't updated the map to reflect that yet. But there's a slew of information out there. Right now, you can manage trees on private property, like if it's a landscape tree. So the knowledge is out there of how to control that. But there's not a good option for forestry. So right now, for forested options, it's unfortunately nothing. Yeah, I know. The bearer of bad news is often our job.
So do you see this change coming from, if there's going to be a change in that direction, it needs to come from the government side of things, as far as legislation trying to get new?
Well, if there was a solution available, so a good invasive species, like a success story, would be Lymantria dispar, where formerly known as gypsy moth, now spongy moth. It was introduced in the 1860s, and so it was spreading. It was defoliating trees, but there was nothing we could do for a while, and it just spread, and we had our hands tied. But now, after research caught up, and we have 3 really good management options for that moth, we've been able to virtually stop it at the Virginia-North Carolina state line. Now we have a program in place, and it is a government program. It's called Slow the Spread, and they monitor for this moth throughout the state. We set 20,000 traps across the state, and we basically treat the state line as a fire line. So every time we see a population of that moth popping up over the state line, we get rid of it because there's management options available. So I think before we get to the point of like government stepping in or government funding something, science has to figure out what that solution actually is. And then we would probably model it very similar to that, the Slow the Spread program. Yeah.
So is public outreach primarily towards prevention, like not spreading firewood, and also detection?
Yeah, it's mostly detection and letting people know not to spread it. But in North Carolina, it's so widespread. Every arborist knows what it is. It's no longer a mystery, and it was for the first year or two. I was like, what is this? But now everyone knows what it is. And I was at an arborist event yesterday, and we were like, who has seen Emerald Ash Borer? Every single hand went up. So it's just commonplace now, especially because of the prevalence in the urban community. But again, people can treat. There was a story yesterday where a landowner treated his tree 6 years in a row, and then he was like, well, all the natural trees around here are dead. I'm just going to stop treating it. And he did, and like 2 years later, his tree was gone. So again, going back to that, it's a decision to treat into perpetuity, unfortunately. For now, until other options are available. Any other questions? Are y'all thoroughly depressed now?
All right, I guess if there's no others, thanks again, Kelly. Awesome talk. My knowledge, the pizza is going to be in this room. He's nodding. So I believe if you're not a grad student, get out. Or come up and say hi, but then get out. No, you stay, because the rest of us are not. So thanks everyone for coming, and have a good one. All right.
Well, it'll be